Hey everyone, this is Watch from the MW Technology channel on YouTube, and in this video we're doing a direct comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S4 and the new iPhone 5S. Now this should be a pretty interesting comparison because they do run on different platforms in terms of iOS versus Android, but the hardware itself seems to be pretty comparable. Obviously it's not completely an apples to apples comparison, but you'll have a good idea on how the iPhone 5S compares against one of the most popular and probably one of the best Android smartphones out there. Now the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the color options that you have available in both these two devices. Starting with the Samsung Galaxy S4, as you see right over here, we have the Forest White edition. You can also get it in Black Mist and Arctic Blue. Now the iPhone 5S also comes in three different colors. It comes in gold, silver, or in space gray. Next, let's take a look at the overall dimensions of these two devices. We'll start with the Samsung Galaxy S4, which measures about 136.6 millimeters in its height, about 69.8 millimeters in its width. Now, the iPhone 5S measures about 123.8 millimeters in its height and about 58.6 millimeters in its width. Now, if we compare these two devices in terms of footprint size, we'll find a very similar result as we did with the iPhone 5 because the 5S is virtually identical in terms of its physical look. There's really no change. Therefore, obviously the 5S is a lot more compact than the S4 in terms of its overall footprint and how much space it takes in your pocket, but obviously it has this smaller screen to boast with that. Now, in terms of thickness itself, you'll be happy to note that both devices are really thin. The GS4 is about 7.9 millimeters and the iPhone 5S is about 7.6 millimeters. Now, in terms of the weight differences, you'll notice that the Samsung Galaxy S4 is just a little bit heavier, measuring about 130 grams versus the 5S's 112 grams. Now, when we take a look at the overall build quality and materials that these two devices are made up of, you'll definitely notice that the 5S is definitely the more premium device in terms of construction. It's made out of really high quality aluminum. There's no flex towards it. It's a very durable product that is fairly resistant to a lot of different things in terms of wear and tear. Now, the GS4 is still fairly durable product, but it is made out of polycarbonate plastic, and if you go on either extreme ends, you can flex it quite a bit. So in terms of build quality and overall build materials, it's definitely not up to the level as the iPhone 5S. Now we're just going to take a second and talk about some of the different unique aspects and features that both of these phones offer. Starting with the 5S, it has a new fingerprint sensor. It's located directly where the home button is, and it's just a way for you to open up your phone in a really quick way. You can also use it for purchasing applications, and it's integrated well into the new iOS 7 platform. And this is going to be an interesting direction that Apple is taking to kind of make the phone a little bit more easier to use. Now, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a ton of different unique features to the phone that really no other smartphone has. It has an air gesture sensor, which allows you to do a lot of different things without even touching your phone. You can glance at your email and missed call messages when the phone is in standby mode by just waving your hand over the phone. You can scroll through pictures. It also has an air view mode where you can just hover your finger and get a closer view of whatever you're looking at, whether it be images or text. Furthermore, it has a system where it monitors your eye and face movement. So if you're watching a video and you're looking at the screen, then you turn away from the screen, it'll actually pause that video, and if you turn back, it'll resume the video playback. It can also scroll up and down depending on where you're looking at the screen. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Samsung's working on something that allows the phone to clean your clothes, wash the dishes, and do your homework all at the same time. Now, another big difference between these two phones is the displays themselves. When we take a look at the physical size of the displays, the Samsung S4 measures about 5 inch and it's very compact. It really uses its full body to display that nice, glorious 5-inch screen. The iPhone is still at 4 inch. Unfortunately, they didn't go up. I'm sure next year you'll have a bigger screen, but currently it's still 4 inches. Now, in terms of resolution, the S4 is 1920 by 1080, which makes sense for a 5-inch screen, and the iPhone 5S 5S, it's still at 1136 by 640. In terms of the pixel density, on the S4 we have 441 ppi, which is certainly a little bit higher than 326 ppi that we have on the iPhone 5S. When we start looking at the real-life picture quality of both these two displays, you'll notice that both of them are really exceptional displays. They both can display over 16 million colors. They are also IPS displays, so you can view them at pretty much any angle. The distinction really comes from the backlighting solution on both of these devices. The iPhone uses LED backlighting with an LCD screen, so the overall color-wise and dynamic range, it's still pretty good. It's a very bright screen as you would find on iPhones. The GS4 uses a Super AMOLED display, which is organic LED technology, and the black levels on that thing is pretty much incredible. I've never seen black levels quite as good as the Samsung Galaxy S4, where they're pretty much pitch black. So if you do a lot of nighttime movie watching on your device, I definitely recommend the Samsung Galaxy S4 display. But overall, in terms of the image quality and experience, I love both displays. They're both very bright and really a delight to use, and it's really going to be a trade-off. If you want the bigger screen, obviously you're going to go for the Samsung device, but if you want something more compact, a little bit more convenient, the 4-inch is just a great size. It can fit in pretty much any pocket. Now let's talk about what's under the hood of these two bad boys. Now both of the processors on these two devices are really powerful, and they fit perfectly with the operating systems that they run at. Now the Samsung Galaxy S4 runs a pretty powerful ARM Cortex-A15 chip, which is a quad-core CPU. Now the iPhone 5S is the first phone or mobile device to have the Apple A7 chip, which is going to use a 64-bit architecture, which is going to really push the envelope in terms of what you can do on the iPhone. It is a dual-core processor clocked in about 1.7 gigahertz, and it has another processor, actually. It has an M7 motion processor. Now if you're going to use a simple superhero analogy, we can say that the A7, the main CPU, is Batman, and the M7 is Robin. Both are important in getting the job done in terms of crunching those calculations. But the M7 specifically will be processing accelerometer, gyroscope, and compass calculations. So with different fitness applications that monitor your walking speed, your running speed, and your calories that you're burning throughout the day, it won't have to rely on the big CPU. So therefore your battery life will be improved as well as the efficiency, and you'll probably find some other third-party applications that will take advantage of the secondary M7 processor to do some pretty interesting things in the future. Now when we're taking a look at the network compatibility of these two devices, they're pretty compatible with a lot of different networks out there. They're going to be available for most of your major carriers all over the world. Now, the Samsung S4 is using LTE technology, much in the same vein as the iPhone 5S, and they both can do up to 100 megabits per second down if you have that speed available to you. In terms of the type of SIM that these two smartphones take, the iPhone is still using the nano SIM technology previously available in the older generations, and the Samsung S4 is using the more common micro SIM technology. Additionally, the similarities continue when we take a look at connectivity. They both have Bluetooth 4.0 as well as dual band Wi-Fi at both 5 gigahertz and 2.5 frequencies, and 802.11a, b, g, and n. Now we talked a lot about the different functionality and specifications of both these two devices, which is sometimes meaningless and just tech jargon, but let's go ahead and take some real-world tests and see how these phones compare in terms of load speeds and overall performance. Now, just in my experience alone, I haven't experienced a huge speed difference between these two smartphones. Even though there's a pretty big difference in terms of the processors, it doesn't really translate to a huge difference in terms of load times of different applications coming up, and websites don't really load faster in a significant way, and really either phones are really on par with each other. Now, when we take a look at some of the benchmark scores of these two devices, especially when we take a look at the Geekbench 3 benchmark comparison, you'll notice that the Samsung S4 is actually a little bit underperforming the 5S, which is quite surprising. You wouldn't wouldn't think so based on some of its core specifications, but based on the latest addition to Geekbench specifications of doing more real-world tests, you'll actually notice a lower score on the Samsung Galaxy S4, which basically means that whatever specification that Geekbench 3 is using right now, it's really kind of collaborating the efforts of the hardware and software to work simultaneously in a very harmonious fashion. And obviously the hardware is not fully optimized with the OS. Now, compared to the iPhone 5S, which is completely built from the ground up to work with iOS, you definitely see that performance difference in both multi-core and single core application tests. Now, obviously, when we're doing real-world tests, it's not really an apples-to-apples comparisons. The operating system is a big factor in smartphones these days, and really any computing device. And both of these are really on par with each other in terms of a lot of different aspects. Now, obviously, Android has a little bit more features in terms of customization and what you could potentially do with your phone, versus the iOS 7 is a lot more easier to use, a lot more user-friendly. And the iOS 7 itself, the update from iOS 6, adds a lot of different conveniences compared to the older generation. It's a lot easier to change a lot of your essential features such as Wi-Fi settings and Bluetooth, and to toggle that in a much more convenient way than going into the settings previously and going through some menus and then doing it. It's a lot more easier to use even, and a little bit more powerful. Obviously the Android platform is quite different and quite diversified with different smartphones, such as the Samsung S4 is not running a pure version of Android. It's running TouchWiz on top of the 4.2.2 Android version that's on here right now. So it's not really the pure Google experience. It's just always a little bit disorienting for some people because you're really competing against two different platforms. You have the Samsung way of doing things, and then they're using the Google interface and platform to do it. And so it's a little bit disjointed at times. Definitely not as seamless as the iOS. Now, for me, I personally like Android a little bit better than the iOS because you can do a lot more things. It's much more like a computer than a mobile device. And obviously, you can get a very simple version of Android and use it in a very simple way too. But in terms of people who are not tech savvy, like my parents or anybody who doesn't use and is not really that nerdy or technically minded, I think iOS is unbeatable in terms of a user interface. Okay, so now with all that stuff aside, let's get to one of the big things that's on smartphones right now, the camera quality and features themselves. Starting with the front-facing camera of these two devices, you'll notice that the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a 2-megapixel stills functionality as well as 1080p at 30 frames per second, which is certainly better than the 1.2 megapixel stills on the iPhone 5S with 720p at 30 frames per second video. Now, when we take a look at the video of these two devices, you'll notice obviously the Samsung has more detail. It is running a lot higher bit rate, and that resolution obviously helps quite a bit as well. But overall, in terms of color rendition and things like that, they're obviously different. I do like the color rendition always on the iPhones. I think they're a little bit more natural than what Samsung typically does with their color balancing. But straight off the bat, both of them are certainly usable for Skyping and video conferencing and things like that, but I would like to see an improvement on the iPhone in terms of resolution. Now, when we start looking at the performance of the rear-facing cameras on the devices, you'll notice some similarities, which is certainly true when we start looking at the similarities of the lenses of the cameras, which both have a maximum aperture of about f2.2, which should be good for low light, and in both cases, we should have a decent amount of light hitting both of the sensors. Now, taking a look at some of the stills functionality on the rear-facing camera, you'll notice that in terms of specification, we have 13 megapixels on the GS4 and about 8 megapixels on the 5S. And in terms of LED, we have a single LED on the GS4 and dual LEDs, which we'll test out in a second and see if they really give better tones. And in terms of video, we have 1080p at 30 frames per second on the Samsung Galaxy S4, and we also have 1080p 1080p at 30 frames per second on the iPhone, but we have a new slow motion mode at 720p, which is going to give you up to 120 frames per second. And in terms of video stabilization, both have video stabilization, but the iPhone has an improved advanced video stabilization. So let's go ahead and test out the stills capability of these two cameras, and we'll take a look at the same scene shot with the cameras respectively at the same angles. And as you can see over here, we have a pretty good illustration on both of the cameras. The 13 megapixels obviously translate into a little bit more fine detail overall when you especially blow things up because of its higher resolution. But when you're looking at it on the screen or just in an overall view and not pixel peeping, I think both phones look tremendously good. I think the iPhone 5S has actually a new sensor in there. It's a true 3/3-inch sensor. It's bigger than the older generation iPhone, and it definitely shows a little bit of improvement in terms of overall sharpness and how much light is actually hitting that sensor. So definitely good in both results. Now here's a test of the low light capabilities of both the cameras. We have the same dimly lit scene, and I'll let you guys decide what looks better to you. Now, as we mentioned before, the Samsung has a single LED flash and the iPhone has a new dual LED system. So in terms of flash results, as you see over here, the Samsung is pretty good. It definitely has a little bit of a color shift because, again, that LED flash is not true 5500 Kelvin. It has a little bit of shift. And the dual LED system on the iPhone is doing a great job in terms of holding those true colors and making sure everything is not shifted in terms of color. So if you do a lot of nighttime stuff and rely on the flash of your smartphone and you again use your smartphone as your main camera, I would definitely say that the LED flash system is better on the iPhone. Now here is the 1080p at 30 frames per second on both phones. You'll notice again they're very similar in many regards. I think the iPhone looks a little bit more clearer, a little bit more defined colors, and the motion is a little bit better too. And that motion is probably due to its advanced video stabilization system. Even though the Samsung has pretty decent video stabilization system, I think Apple has done a really great job with improving their existing stabilization system, and definitely looks great. If you do a lot of handheld stuff, the iPhone is certainly a little bit more smoother. Now here's a video low light test of the two video cameras, and again, just like we did with the stills, I'll let you guys decide what looks better to you in a more dimly lit situation. Now, one of the cool things about the 5S is that it has 720p at 120 frames per second, which is going to allow you to do some pretty cool slow motion stuff, which is, again, really incredible considering the camera phone aspect of itself. You're going to find thousands of dollars of cameras that won't even have this feature. So it's pretty darn incredible that you have actual pretty decent slow motion at HD. So what's this going to really translate into, you're going to have a lot better entertainment experience of watching people fall down, and the fail videos are definitely going to be a lot better where people can actually slow down stuff and look at things in super slow motion. Now in terms of the battery life and capacity, the Samsung Galaxy S4 is a little bit more power hungry, so it requires a bigger battery at 2600 milliamp hour battery in there, and it's roughly rated for about 17 hours of talk time. Now, I've never gotten 17 hours of 3G talk time, so I would realistically put 10 to 14 hours, but Samsung says 17 hours of 3G talk time. Now, the iPhone is certainly a more consistent in terms of its battery life test. Apple's really reliable in providing those hourly scores, and it's a 10-hour battery at 3G talk time, and in terms of battery capacity, it's 1570 milliamp hours. Now, one of the big reasons people love the Samsung Galaxy S4 is the fact that it does have a user replaceable battery and expandable memory. memory, and really makes it a little bit more unique compared to a lot of smartphones that are not having that feature. Certainly the iPhone has never had that feature. In terms of expandable memory, that's pretty amazing, since you can expand it up to like 64 gigs and probably even more later on in the future with updates. And with a user replaceable battery life is never going to be a real issue if you're away from the power all the time. You can just buy a whole bunch of these batteries for pretty cheap, and if you go on vacation or usually don't have power with you during most of your days and you're a power user, you can definitely have a lot of flexibility with the Samsung Galaxy S4. But other than that, guys, if you have any specific questions about anything I talked about in this video, please make sure to leave it in a comment down below. If you like any one of these phones for any specific reason, please let me know, and again in a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts, whether you like the S4 better than the 5S. I know you can get the S4 pretty decent price if you're looking used and things like that. The 5S is certainly a great improvement from the 5, and definitely has some unique advantages that even the S4 doesn't have. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.